Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome, welcome. Good to see you all here, and we have probably 100 people or so online, so we've got a good crowd. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I came to meet Tamika. I was home a few months ago, and my husband said, I really want you to see this video. This woman is so inspiring, and I was like, yeah, okay. And he kept at it, and finally, a few weeks later, in the evening, I watched a video of one of Tamika's talks, and it made me really uncomfortable. It opened my eyes. I was inspired. I was educated. And I kept thinking about her message. And so when I got back to work, I talked to Allison a few days later, my boss. I'm Leanne, by the way, and I work for Allison, who is the sponsor of the Women in DX Forum. And so I talked to her, and I said, really want to bring this woman up here so that we can all listen to her. And so I looked her up on LinkedIn and found a number for her and called her, and we got to talking. Or I sent her an email, and then we connected, and we got to talking. And I'm super happy to have her here today. She's very unique in her style and approach. I thought about it even last night as we were having a great dinner together and spent some time talking. She's a master storyteller, and she has a way of listening actively and also gently pushing your thinking differently, and really like that. She's a very well-known social justice advocate, having begun her career as an attorney out of Stanford, working on employment discrimination. And that was the beginning, but just the beginning of her journey in this space. And she's been involved in many efforts in this area, mostly on racial inequality and LGBTQ issues. And I know she's going to talk to you more about her work in this area and the path that she's taken. So please give a warm Microsoft welcome, even those online, to Tamika Butler.
Thank you so much. Not a lot to live up to there in that intro. So this should be totally fine. My name is Tamika Butler. I'm super happy to be here with everyone today. I'll walk back and forth and try to stay out of the light and from in front of the slides. I will say that I got a last-minute text from my wife who said to make sure I let people know if anyone wants to use social media while I'm talking, please do, so she can follow. So on Twitter, I'm at Tamika Butler, spelled just as it is there, very much like Tamika. So I'm sure you're thinking, wait, who is she? Leanne said a lot of nice things, but what is this person's story? Why is this person here? And why is this person talking to us at Microsoft about rethinking white spaces and what that means in tech? And throughout the presentation, I'll tell a few stories because Leanne is right, I like to tell stories, much to the chagrin of most people in my life. Has anybody seen the movie Fences? Anybody? So in Fences, the character Denzel plays, he's a master storyteller, right? He's like every black dad you'll ever know who tells these stories, and I'm very much like my dad, and so I tell a lot of stories. And this is, when you see these images up of books, they're books that have meant a lot to me in my life. And I remember reading this book when I was in high school and really thinking about what it meant to be young, gifted, and black. So I have a ton of friends who are in the tech industry. I'm not personally in the tech industry, but I have a ton of friends, right? And if you have a friend, right? I have a black friend. If you have a friend who does something, then you know everything about it. And when you go to Stanford, you get a lot of tech friends. And so I did a poll of all of my friends, and I said, what makes you successful in the tech world? What is it that, what's that difference between somebody who just starts something and you never hear about them, they never make it out of their parents' garage, and the people who are big? And to a person, in various ways, they each said a willingness to take risk and a willingness to fail. Because when you're in this industry, I kept hearing, you have a lot of failures. You have more failures than you have successes. But you have to be willing to do what I did at this, at Versailles. There were tons of people around, but I'm like, this could be a really dope picture. So I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to jump, and the ground's, uneven, and I might land and I might not, but I'm willing to take this risk. But I've also had a ton of failures. I'm from Nebraska, which I'll talk about more shortly. There are no mountains in Nebraska, so we don't ski. So this is a picture from my first ski trip, my last ski trip. And I think that one of the things I've learned is that I am a person who takes big risk. I'm a person who fails a lot. But as you think, through this talk, and as you think about the various things I say, think about if we all have the equal chance to take risk and fail, and what risk and failure looks like in predominantly white spaces, and what risk and failure looks like in tech spaces. And so I looked up inspirational quotes from your head guy, and this to me was like, whoa, this is exactly what my friend said, right? Like, you're gonna try things, and sometimes you're gonna be super successful, and sometimes you're gonna be, someone who doesn't do as well, but if it averages out, you'll be all right, right? So he was also saying what my friend said. Are you taking risk? Are you okay to fail? Are you okay knowing that every day isn't gonna be your best day? But again, does that work for everyone? And so I wanna tell you a story about, growing up in Nebraska. So my dad has 14 brothers and sisters. They're all from Nebraska. He grew up in the projects. He met my mom in high school in Nebraska. And they decided to leave Nebraska for a better life. So I grew up all over. My dad was in the military. And then one day he came home and he said, we're moving back to the States. Where do you and your sister want to go? And in the military, you get to fill out like your rankings. And we were like, we want to go to California. We want to go to Florida. We want to go to Hawaii. And he comes home a few months later and he's like, we're going to Nebraska. And so my parents were thrilled. And my sister and I were like, what's in Nebraska? Like, our cousins are in Nebraska, but like, we haven't seen a concert in years. Like, we don't have cable here. What are we going to get in Nebraska? And in Nebraska, you get corn, you get more corn, and you get white people. This is not a joke. I just Googled Nebraska. And there was just this wonderful sunset, and sunsets are wonderful in Nebraska. But there was a white lady, because there's a lot of white ladies in Nebraska. So when people say, what makes you an expert about being in white spaces? I'm like, have you ever been to Nebraska? Because there are a lot of black folks there. I'm related to all of them, but there's a lot of black folks there. But there are also a lot of white people. And so I know a little bit about white spaces, but just to like really, really dig into white spaces, I went to college in Omaha. And if you can't tell, this is a church. So I went to a Jesuit school in Omaha, Creighton University. And if you think that like Nebraska's white, like Catholics in Nebraska, like mind-blowing, so white, right? So I was around white people all the time. And in college, I already knew I was gay. I had already come out. But I felt like I had to have two separate identities. I felt like I could be a black student, and I could hang out with all my black friends. And this is a picture of me with my sorority sisters and brothers, and we like to keep the diversity in there, so we have, a few non-black folks. But I was part of this historically black sorority, Zeta Phi Beta. And I really joined the sorority because I so wanted to connect with other black folks, right? I grew up predominantly in Japan. And though I was black, and though I knew I was black, because my parents are black, and my sister is black, my grandma's black, my other grandma's black, everybody's black. And even though I knew I was black, I grew up in a place in Japan where we were all American. When people saw you, they didn't say, oh, you're Asian, oh, you're white. They said you're American. And then I moved back to Nebraska, where for the first time I was confronted with what it meant to be a person of color in this country, where you weren't just viewed as American, you were viewed as an other. And that's something that so many of us feel every time we're in a white space. I guarantee every person of color in here did a little survey when they got in and said, how many other folks of color in here? Let me count. because you're constantly aware. And so I knew at my predominantly white Catholic university, I was one of few black folks. This is almost all the black folks from Creighton when I was there, right? But we celebrated each other. We were all there when we graduated. This is after I graduated. I came back because I love the other black students so much. And our token white girl, Jade, she's from Iowa, she's from a farm, but she had a cow named Beyonce, so we thought she was down. And we really hung tight with her. But then I also wanted to take risk. I didn't want to just hang out with the other folks who look like me. I didn't want to just hang out with the other folks who necessarily made me the most comfortable. So I did things a lot of the other black students didn't do. This is me in college at a conference for RAs. So I was the only black RA on staff at a university with tons of students. And I was a black RA because I had a black RA, and my black RA came to my room and said, "You're going to be the black RA." So I became an RA. And I think the next year we had 3 black RAs. But when I was in this space, I knew that I couldn't be my authentic black self, right? It was a threat to so many of the students. As an RA, I had to deal with one of my students saying that she felt threatened by her black roommate because she put up a rap poster. And she felt scared. And I had to watch administration make the black student switch rooms because the white student didn't feel safe. I got super involved in gay issues. This is my quintessential gay white friend, Adam. He's great. But Adam and I, we were homies. We did everything together. He was an RA, I was an RA. I was in Gay Straight Alliance. I was the president. He was the vice president. Everything we did together. And, it was this experience where I was like, I'm going to take risk. I'm going to do what the white boy does. I'm going to do what the boy who grew up as Catholic does. And I'm going to be accepted. And these folks are going to love me. And when I leave, they're going to say I was the best black kid who ever came to this campus, right? And then something really strange happened. My junior year of college, one of my friends who was an RA, another white guy named Adam, he came to me and he said, "Tamika, my little sister is going to start next year as a freshman, and she's gay. She's only come out to me, and I want you to look out for her." Because anybody who knows big Catholic families know they have a lot of kids, and they're kind of spread out, right? So he was about to graduate. One of the siblings was super high up in student services. The dad was a professor. Everyone had gone to Creighton. And he's like, "No one knows, can you watch out for her?" I said, "Sure." So when she started, we hung out all the time. I made sure she went to meetings. I made sure she had a space where she could feel comfortable. And then one night, we were hanging out in my dorm room, and she let me know she liked me. We kissed a little bit. I said, "I can't do this. I have a girlfriend." And she left. And then the next day, my girlfriend, who happened to be an RA in the building where this young woman lived, called me and said, "She told me you raped her." So now I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do. Because I'm in my 3rd year at school. I'm thinking about going to law school. I'm like hot shit on campus. Everybody not only knows who I am, they pronounce my name correctly. It's not Tamika, it's Tamika. I've really invested time in this university. I've taken risk. I've put myself out there. I've been an RA when no other black kids would be RA. I defended the administration when they did shitty things to other black students because I knew I could make a difference. And now there's a freshman who hasn't been here as long as me, who hasn't built up as much credibility, and she's saying I raped her. So I go to student services, and I tell the discipline guy, who's a gay black guy, "Yo, I think this girl's gonna say I raped her, and I didn't rape her." And he says, "Okay, let's see what we can do." Well, he had a reporting requirement, and so he had to report it. And the next several months were hell. Despite the fact that I had been at this university for 3 years and given everything to this university, I was viewed as a rapist. I was told I couldn't talk about this incident or do anything to disparage this other student. But she told anyone who would listen that I raped her. Not only did she say I raped her, she fabricated this story that had happened on multiple occasions. And she was able to fabricate very specific details because the year before, I was sexually and physically and verbally abused by my boss when I was an RA. And I had confided this in her. And so she used those same details to say that I did that to her. And when I reported my boss for doing it, who was a black woman, she was kicked off campus, but disciplinary action was taken against me. Because at a Catholic university, you can't engage in sexual relations with someone of the same sex, even though I was a child, and this person took advantage of me. So when a black woman does it to me, I get in trouble. But when a white woman, who's a little bit more feminine, accuses me, everyone listens. I was told I was going to get kicked out of school. I was told I was going to be arrested, and I was actually going to go to prison. I was told that a million bad things were going to happen. And then there was a student from the law school who stepped up to represent me. She was gay, but she said I couldn't tell anybody because in that predominantly white, straight space, this queer woman of color didn't want anyone to know. But she said she would do everything she could to help me. And she did. Because unfortunately, the accuser had way too many details and said I did all these things when I was in class and when I had proof of being in class. Probably the crappiest thing that happened through all of this is that my perfect 4.0 GPA took a hit because I got to be in a class because I was stressed out. My mom had to sit in a disciplinary hearing and listen to this white woman say I had done these things to her. And when it was over, and when I was found not responsible, no one ever said it was a lie, but when I was found not responsible, my parents said to me, "This is why you can't mess around with white women." Because when they say you've done something, other white people believe them. And at the end of the day, you can have the best grades. I graduated at the top of my class. I got a Dean's Award. I got into Harvard Law School. I got into Stanford Law School. I got everything except Creighton every year gives a Spirit of Creighton Award to the student who best exemplifies the standards of Creighton University. And I had a nun say to me, "Hands down, this is your award. And if it's not your award, it's because people believe her and they think you raped her." So the Black Employee Network gave me their service award, their academic award, their Spirit of Creighton award. And when the university announced who got the Spirit of Creighton award for my class, it was Adam. The guy who I did everything just like him, except I was the president, he was the vice president. Except I was taking more risk than him. Adam's still one of my best friends. One of the things I'm least proud of in life is that I wasn't happy for him on that day because I was devastated. That what I knew is that no matter what I had done for 4 years, having a white woman say I raped her, despite how much everyone knew about me, they believed her. And so I thought to myself, I gotta get out of Omaha. I'm clearly too black, too gay, too masculine. I can't survive here. I gotta go. So I went to San Francisco. Because no one told me that San Francisco is super white. No one told me. I went to San Francisco thinking, I'm leaving Nebraska. I'm going to be around all these folks of color. I'm going to be gay as hell. I'm just going to be gay, gay, gay everywhere. And it's going to be awesome. And you know, I grew up in a super black family. Super black. I mean, do you see my dad's little like cell phone thing in his ear? That's a black dad. Never takes it off. I'm like, Dad, I'm getting married. I need you to take this off. He's like, what if I get a call? Right? So I grew up in this super black family from Omaha. I thought, when I go to San Francisco, there's surely going to be more black people. But there wasn't. They had all been pushed to one neighborhood. They had all been pushed to the East Bay. And also, no one told me Palo Alto is not San Francisco. So that's just like this whole other version of whiteness, right? But that's okay. I went to Stanford Law School. And that was great. It was the first place I felt like I could be my authentic self. I mean, not necessarily because of the diversity. In my class of 170 people, very small, we're very exclusive. In my class of 170 people, I was the only gay woman. We're about, a few years out now. I'm still waiting for a few to come out that I had my eye on. But I was the only out gay woman. There were 3 gay men, all folks of color. And then, I started to think I could be myself. I could be black and I can be gay. I don't have to be in a space where I'm too black for my gay friends and I'm too gay for my black friends. I was surrounded by great people who supported me, who loved me, who fully embraced all of who I was. And I graduated. And then I became a lawyer. And it was awesome. My mom was proud of me. She told all her friends I was a lawyer. She always had to drop. I went to Stanford, not Harvard. She was still a little disappointed about that. But I had made it, right? First person in my family with a graduate degree. First lawyer in my family. The first person who was out there doing something, right? I had made it out of Omaha. All my cousins say, you made it out the projects. They mainly say it when they're calling me and asking me legal advice, but they all are really proud of me, right? And I got to do cool things. I was the youngest co-chair of the National Center for Lesbian Rights Board. And I worked at an employment organization that helped undocumented folks of color with any employment discrimination issues they faced. And I was in our LGBT group, our gender group, and our race group. And I was doing amazing things. And then one day, I had a friend call me. I had gotten this prestigious fellowship, and a friend of mine from the fellowship class below me called me from LA. She said, hey, my organization is folding, and I gotta go somewhere with my fellowship. It's employment related. Do you think you can convince your job to take me? I said, sure. She and I had never really spent a lot of time together for the fellowship. We went to New York once a year. We were friendly, maybe a little flirty, but she was always with the partner. I was always with the partner. We were just good friends who kind of looked out for each other. She ended up coming to our organization, and it was great. It was fantastic. Then one day, I got called into HR. And I sat down, and granted, I've been there longer than she has. In fact, I was there as a student. So I've had a history with this organization. And the woman in HR sat me down and she said, your office mate, white woman, says that you've done something inappropriate to her. And I said, well, what'd she say I did? Well, we didn't want to ask her because she was so upset. Well, then, what do you want me to tell you? I mean, sometimes I fart in the office, like, that's really inappropriate because it smells really bad, but I don't know what else you want me to tell you. And she said, well, just to avoid anything in the future, we're going to have to take you out of your office. And I was crushed. I was mainly crushed because at one point, this office mate of mine had taken me to lunch and said, sometimes I feel like we're a little flirty, and I want you to know I have a partner. And I said, I want you to know I have a partner too. And I never took it as flirty. I'm just super nice. I'm a Midwesterner. Like, we're just nice to everybody. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, just tell me. Because let me tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me in college. And so I told her what happened. She's like, oh my God, that's horrible. I would never do that. And then a few months later, here I am in HR. And because I'm a woman of color, we're taught not to cry. We're taught to hold it together. We're taught not to have too angry of a resting face. We're taught to be so tight and so good. I shared that inspirational quote from your boss about what your average is. Women of color don't get to be average. It doesn't matter what our average is because no one gives us a chance to get to the average, right? So I didn't cry. I was polite. I was nice. But apparently, because I wasn't upset, they thought I must have done something. And so they moved me out of my office and changed her work schedule so she didn't have to ever see me because I was such a threat. So for me, I feel like I'm an expert in white spaces because not only have I inhabited white spaces, as we all do, even if you're not white, but I've been a victim to being the person of color, to being the woman, to being the queer person in this white, male, straight space who dares to take a risk, who dares to be different. And I've fallen victim to the ways of white folks. Because when you have something, the last thing you want to see is somebody else take it. And there's nothing more threatening than somebody who always seems happy, who's always on top of it, who always gets their shit done, who always says yes. And as folks of color, that's often who we are in the workplace. Because if we're not that, we don't stay. But by being that, and if you're a woman, you understand this too. If you're queer, you understand this too. By being at the top of your game, you're also a threat. So I'm supposed to talk about, I think, recruiting and keeping folks of color in the tech space. So we'll go there now. So what do I know about tech? I did a video chat once with some friends. It worked out really well. I also did a little research. So I just typed in to Google, Apple leadership. So if you were really like me, and maybe you didn't have a lot of experience in tech, but you said, I have a passion for tech. Maybe you're someone like my dad. I grew up with this black man who didn't have a college degree, who had no grad school degree. And my dad taught himself how to build computers from scratch. Every computer we've had in my house, until he got old and lazy, every computer we had, my dad built from scratch. Every computer my cousins have, every computer my uncles have, every computer my aunts have, my dad built. And no one ever taught him how to do this because no one was ever going to take a chance on this black man who was really good with the basketball and really good with the football to teach him computer skills. So he taught himself, right? So this is a guy who might say there was somebody like my dad who was like, I'm really interested in computers. I've taught myself everything. I want to get a job where I get paid, right? Because I can tell you what, my family does not pay my dad. We give him headaches, and sometimes we bring him cookies, because he is a man who likes cookies. But we do not pay him. So if you were somebody who was like, I'm good at this, I have a knack for this, let me find a job. Who's doing tech, right? When you're growing up and you're interested in professional opportunities, they always say to you, look at people who are doing the work you want to do and figure out how they got there. So let's say my dad, Lawrence Tyrone Butler, searched for Apple leadership. And this is the first page. If you keep scrolling, there's a black woman, just one. But this is what he would find. And then maybe he looked at HP or IBM or just Googled leadership in tech. And these are the images that pop up. And so I went to those same friends who told me that to be successful in this industry, you have to be able to take risk and you have to be able to fail. And I said, why aren't there more people of color and women in tech? And they all said the same thing again. Because they don't see anybody who looks like them. And when they look to see if a company who says we care about diversity, we care about outreach to diverse communities, when they look at the board, when they look at the executive team, they don't see that commitment. Because do you hire women and people of color in leadership roles where they get to help shape the culture of an organization, or do you give them entry level and middle management roles where they can have a title but not actually change the policies and practices and culture of these organizations? Because if I'm just a kid from Omaha, Nebraska, from the projects, and I want to be in tech, and I want to move out to the West Coast, and I want to help change the way people connect and experience one another, but there's no one who looks like me. And if I'm an intersection of those things, oh man, forget it. But there might be, a few white women here and there. There might be a few gay white men here and there. But are there really folks of color leading and shaping the culture? And so whenever people say to me, Tamika, you are an employment lawyer. Come in and help us look at our practices and make sure we don't face discrimination lawsuits. What can we do? I always say, yeah, you got to start from the bottom. You got to look at where you're advertising, who you're advertising to, how you're talking to people. Is it culturally relevant? But you got to go right to the top. Because if you're not interested in having anybody on your board that looks like me, then I don't know that I believe that you're really interested in changing the industry. And you have to think about these things in the context of where we presently sit, right? This is our outgoing president. If I had a 40, I'd pour a little out for him. And when you look at these pictures, it's pretty clear. I mean, Barack, he's a light-skinned brother, but he still looks like a brother, right? And he's mixed in with all of these folks that don't look like me. And so I did a privilege walk the other day in one of the leadership trainings I lead. And as always, I'm at the back when I do a privilege walk. And you got to take a step forward if your parents had ever told you, you can be anything you want to be. And a lot of us took steps forward, even the folks of color, because our parents believed in us, because our parents had the imagination to think outside of the box and see us in positions that they never thought would be a reality. So when I also hear tech folks say that in order to be successful in this industry, you have to have innovation. You have to be creative. You have to imagine things not yet in existence and make them exist. I get really confused why there's not more folks of color, because we got the best imagination in the world. We've been able to believe we can do things that people have systematically oppressed us to believe we can't do. That's why Barack is laughing. He's like, oh, y'all thought you were good. I'm good. and I look good, right? He was able to give so many of us something to look at and say, I could be that. This is another place where I can look and I can see and I can be. But as a queer woman, there's still a lot missing, right? Where are the women? Where are the folks who are openly and proudly queer or trans? So we have all these folks in our country who don't have the imagery to believe that you can do anything you want to do, and they're still doing it, but yet they're underrepresented in one of the most creative fields. I'll say it again, it just doesn't make sense to me. Because the resilience of my people tells me that we should be in the boardroom, that we should be running countries, that we shouldn't just be reduced to our race, our gender, our sexuality, and hired in a position to check a box or a few boxes, but then given no real power to do anything. We get to serve on your diversity committee, which is more work. We get to plan your diversity events, which is more work. We get to be all over the website and have our pictures taken. We always had this joke in law school whenever the folks of color would hang out. There was this photographer that just jumped out the bushes all the time, just to be like, there are folks of color at Stanford. And we would just scatter, because we knew. Who's paying us for these pictures? So what do you do to truly integrate folks of color? And how do you think about the white spaces we're in right now, today? When we are in the backdrop of a country where more than ever, those of us who look a little different are clearer than ever before that we don't belong. It's not even the end of January, and there have already been multiple deaths of trans women. And no one talks about it because they'd rather talk about a tweet, right? We're in a country where when we're folks of privilege and we work at fancy companies, we have international people from everywhere working with us. But do we know how the folks who might not be in the nice offices with us feel? The folks that you might pass on the train, not because they've made a lifestyle choice not to have a car, but because they rely on the train? The folks cleaning those nice offices, are they afraid that their parents are going to get deported? Are they afraid that the people they love the most, who are just as American as you and me, are going to be asked to leave? We're in a world where the one place so many queer folks feel safe, where we can be ourselves, where we can laugh and dance and kiss and touch, isn't even safe anymore. And even when all my friends are allies and they change their Facebook picture to be Pulse nightclub, no one wants to talk about the fact that this was predominantly a club for people of color. And that there was that double minority status where we aren't safe. Or that the way you worship means people feel like they can just walk up to you on the street and stab you. They can spray paint the place you go to worship. One of my staff members, I have a day job, one of my staff members texted me the other day and said, Tamika, I'm going to be late. Our mosque was destroyed, and we can't get the police department to come. We're in a world where women are having their rights stripped. So much so that they're organizing marches all over the country just so people realize that we're not really as far as they think we are. That we're just a few Supreme Court decisions, congressional acts away from going back to where we were. And don't even get me started about black folks. I tell my friends all the time that I don't use the word genocide lightly. But there is a genocide against black people in this country. When you can, from a helicopter, see a black man fixing his car and say he looks dangerous because he's black. Or when you see a teenage girl who gets hit by a car on a bike, she got hit by a car, and she gets put in the back of a cop car and maced. I bet that wouldn't happen if she was blonde, had blue eyes. Someone disobeys police officers, according to who? And just mysteriously dies in their cell? Someone tells you they can't breathe, and it doesn't matter? So many people don't like to look at these images because it makes them uncomfortable. Because they don't want to think about the fact that they live in a country where this could happen every day. Where you could be laying on the ground when you're helping somebody with your hands in the air and still get shot. They don't want to think about all the black faces, whether or not they served our country, whether or not they were teachers, parents, because it makes them uncomfortable. And then they have to admit that when we talk about white spaces, we're talking about our whole damn country. And one of the most dangerous things in this country is being black. And I can't change that. And I have to know that when I'm walking down the street late at night, I might feel unsafe because I'm a woman. I might feel unsafe because to many people I represent as a man, and not just any man, a black man. I might feel unsafe because I might be holding my wife's hand. I have to think about all of these things, and I have to think about it quickly, and I have to be able to process it quickly, and I have to know how to get out of trouble. And if I can do all of that, I'm probably smart enough to work at a tech company. But I don't. And there's so many people who look like me who don't. And at some point, you just kind of throw your hands up in the air and you just say, enough is enough. What do we do? How do we change these white spaces? Well, back in the day, it was all about diversity, right? You had your clip art picture, you had your guy in the wheelchair in the front, and you said, we're gonna be diverse, and that'll do it. But at some point, you have to go beyond diversity to inclusion, right? Because I used to be a kid who didn't like any of my food to touch. So I might have had a super diverse plate, but was it all really mixed in? Was it all really ingrained? What this says is that you can be diverse without being inclusive. If you invite all the folks of color to your party, but you don't talk to them, and you just let them do their own thing in the corner, and you never bring them into the room, you never bring them into the meeting, you never bring them into the decision-making processes, you never bring them in to the executive suite, you never bring them onto the board, then I'll tell you what, they're not gonna stay. Because you can be at an organization real quick and you know the difference between diversity and a splashy part of the website and inclusion. You know if your voice matters. You know if you can show up as your authentic self, right? One of my friends in tech said, there's not more people of color and women because we can't be our full authentic selves. And the only people who can are sensitive, mediocre white dudes. And their feelings really matter. But our feelings don't matter. And we don't feel included. We just feel like we're clip art. We just feel like we're diversity. So how do you get beyond even inclusion to a point where you have equity, where you realize that we're not giving everybody the same thing to get them to those boardrooms, to get them to those executive suites, to get them to the board? That we have folks in this country who have been historically neglected and denied opportunity, that have been oppressed, that have fallen victim to white supremacy. And it's uncomfortable, but you gotta say it. White supremacy is real. And when people fall victim to it, it's not enough to just give them the same stool as everybody else. You have to think about, what do we have to do to truly be equitable, to truly give all folks the chance to use that fast processing, that creativity, that ability to think outside of the box. Maybe they don't have that Stanford degree. Maybe they don't have everything that everyone else had who looked a little differently. But are they qualified? Can they do this work? And are they going to make us better? And then I just want to say, you got to be more than an ally. You got to do more than wear a safety pin. Because you can't just wear a safety pin and then expect people to pat you on the back. Like, I saw a black lady at a store today and she smiled at me. It's because I was wearing my safety pin. It's because she's friendly. Because your safety pin doesn't mean shit if you're not willing to do anything to back it up. Are you willing to teach yourself? Are you willing to read some of the books? Are you willing to fail in this way? See, in order to succeed in this industry, you have to be willing to take risk and fail. But so often, people are so afraid to be called racist. People are so afraid to say the wrong thing that they won't fail in spaces that they're not comfortable in. Yet every single day, you ask people of color, you ask women, you ask queer folks to show up in spaces that are not theirs, take a risk, and be uncomfortable. And so often, it blows up in our face. We almost get kicked out of school. We get kicked out of our offices. We get told we're too aggressive. We get told we're not as smart as everybody else. We get told we were close to getting the job. We're just not as qualified as the other applicants. But we were articulate. What does being an ally mean? It means you have to do something. It's not a noun. What are you doing to help? When you notice those people aren't in the boardroom, are you saying something? Or are you just hiring the person of color to come into the room and then forcing them to say something? Even though you've been in the room for so long and you could have been saying something a long time ago. You can't be fragile. This is a slide I always show, because white people are fragile as fuck. Men are fragile as fuck. It can't be about you. You have to be willing to be called out. You have to be willing to feel uncomfortable. And then when you're feeling really upset about that, you got to figure it out. And sometimes that means saying sorry, but not in the Justin Bieber way. Because Justin says sorry, and then he does it again. And you're just like, Selena, don't go back. He's going to do it again. When you say sorry, do you really know what you mean? Are you saying, I know what I did is wrong, and I won't do it again? Or, I'm going to take a risk. I might do it again, but I'm going to keep working at it. Because as folks of color, we got to work at it, right? Some folks of color grew up listening to NPR. I did not. So I had to work at that shit. I had to get used to that. I had to understand that that was better than hearing sports radio. It took me some time, but I'm there. I can now listen to NPR, right? I had to work on it. I had to work on being in predominantly white spaces because all spaces are predominantly white. Because when we make spaces for ourselves that aren't predominantly white, we're excluding others. We're being racist, even though that's impossible because race is about power and we don't have power. So what are you doing when you say sorry? What are you doing when you're being an ally? Are you getting to a point where you understand your privilege? Where you understand that when folks of color are saying to each other, stay woke, what so many of us know is that we ain't never sleep. Because we can't fall asleep. We might lose our lives. We might get shot. We might have someone tell us our kids can't get into honors classes just based on the assumption that they're not smart enough. If we fall asleep, we could lose everything. Just like that. So if you have the privilege to sometimes close your eyes, if you have the privilege to not look at those images, if you have the privilege to put on a safety pin and think, well, now people don't have to worry if I voted for someone, or now people know I'm okay, now people know I'm safe. My skin color is viewed as dangerous and a weapon. I never get to go to sleep. So if you are lucky enough that sometimes you get to just close your eyes and recharge and not think about the ugly parts of this country that you don't want to think about, then what are you doing with that privilege? Privilege is not a bad thing. If you do the privilege walk and you have all the advantages in the world and you're a straight white man and you're at the front, you shouldn't feel guilty. You should ask yourself, what am I going to do with this privilege? What am I going to do in these boardrooms? What am I going to do? And the last story I'll share before finishing is I'll go back to that work experience where I was pushed out of my office and I just felt invisible. They put me in this corner office, tried to tell me it was nice because it was a corner office, even though the window looked into the alley. It was the darkest office in the whole building. And I didn't know what to do. But I went to one of my allies, a white woman, who lost it. Because she's allowed to yell. She's allowed to cuss people out. She's allowed to tell people that what they were doing was wrong. And in that moment where I could not speak for myself, not because I'm not capable, but because I was broken, I needed somebody else. And she was that person. And that's not always easy. But if you think it's easy to be a person of color in this world, in this company, in this industry, it's not. We know what it's like to be invisible. And we have to fight it every day. Because we don't get to call in black. We don't get to say we just can't do it today. I was talking to my wife, who's very white. She's Canadian, hence the Justin Bieber reference. And we were talking about some folks in our life who say some real problematic shit. And they don't live where we live. And so she said to me, my way of handling that is that I just deal with it when they're here, and then when they leave, it just goes away. Why is that such a big deal? And why are you trying to make me feel guilty for that? And I had to say to her, I love you. But if I just put up with people who said problematic things, I would never be okay. The microaggressions I face every day, when people are afraid of me, when people cross the street, when people are condescending to me, when people at the doctor's office, before I even say anything, say they can't help me because I don't have insurance, even though not only do I have a job, I'm the boss. I told her, if I just ignored people who said problematic things, I wouldn't have anybody in my life. I would just be the girl in the bubble. And if you think I'm a target now, put my ass in a bubble. Everybody be looking at me. And I'm not making you feel bad. I'm telling you my truth. I'm telling you what I experience walking as a queer, non-gender conforming Black woman in this country. And you're my wife, and I love you. But I'm not making you feel bad. You might feel guilty. You're being fragile as fuck right now. But you better go find some of your white friends who are a little more woke than you, and you better work this out. Because we're not going to deal with problematic people in our life. And it took some time, but she came back. She said, you're right, because I'm always right. And she said to me, you know, you have this way to push me, to make me do the things I don't want to do. To do the things that make me take a risk, that do the things that may make people who I love and care about think differently about me. But you do that every single day. So I can do it for you. So when you leave here, who are you going to do that for? Thank you.
Anybody has any questions for Tamika? She can stay a few more minutes and answer questions. And if there's any online, please send them.
I was just so thorough.
Hey, so you talk about at the very end how what are we going to do for other people in our lives to try to push forward and make sure everyone's a little more woke, and including ourselves. How do you feel about larger scale things like, say, Sean King's Injustice boycott?
I didn't hear the last.
How do you feel about things like on a bigger scale, like the Injustice boycott?
I think that things on a bigger scale are totally important. And for me, it's never a matter of should it be small scale or should it be big scale. It's a matter of, is that going to be it, right? And I think that's the more important question, because like I tell people all the time, I'm not going to the Women's March. I'm not a protester. That's just not who I am, right? And that doesn't make me a bad person. And so for me, it's more about what am I doing constantly? What are we all doing every day? Because again, there's some of us who have no choice. And so even in those moments where you feel like, well, I just did this really big thing and I was part of this really big action and I was on the organizing committee, is that it? And so that's the question I always ask. What's next?
Did you have one too? Okay. You told a couple of powerful stories about times when you shared a really troubling and vulnerable experience, and the white women that you shared that with exploited it and used it against you. And I'm kind of an oversharer myself, and I'm kind of wondering, does that make you harden and kind of stop being vulnerable with people, or is it so intrinsic to who you are that you will just confront that kind of demon again if it happens again?
Yeah, you know, it probably should harden me a little bit, but I'm a Midwesterner to my core. Like, we're just, we're open people, and I choose to see the best in people. I think in each of those situations, there was something going on with those women. And I feel bad that they felt the need to do that to accomplish whatever task they were trying to accomplish. But I don't hold it against them. I'm not a person who does that. I always tell my wife if I wrote a book, it would be white women and the trouble they cause me. But, she's a white woman. And I think that it would be a lie to say that there aren't some struggles in our marriage that are mainly mine, where sometimes you just don't want to go home and explain something. Like sometimes I just want her to know. And so there are days where I am hardened, and there are days where I'm like, yo, I'm done with your people, boo. Like, I'm going to go watch Scandal. I'm going to go watch Queen Sugar, and I'm just going to go be black as hell. And I just need you to just do something else. But I think overwhelmingly, oftentimes I try to see the best in people. And sometimes when you can't, then I try not to be on that level, and I try to just keep it moving.
Your talk, first of all, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to have you here. You've spanned comments and experiences that are specific to the professional workplace, but a lot of your talk reaches into our culture at large. And at some point, it's very clear that it is hard to separate politics from the workplace. Like we can't ignore that. So when you work with companies, how do you not account for that, but this is something I struggle with at work. Like, how open and vocal are you when that makes you yourself feel like, oh, maybe I'm going to be looked at as like I'm the woman or the Latina, bringing that up on my team. How do you continue to be a good ally and be vocal and incorporate that in a workplace in a way that is, I think, firm and consistent, but do you hear what I'm getting at?
Totally.
Do you hear why it's just like so much conflict?
I think it's tough, and I do think it starts from the top. I think if you have a leader that establishes a culture that it is okay to bring your full self to work, you can handle some of that. And I think, that's easy for me because I'm the leader of an organization, but we're very small. We have 10 people. So it's very easy for me on Monday before the election to say, hey guys, I think this person's going to win. And when that happens, if you need a day, take a day. It's very easy for me to do that. And maybe in a larger company, you can't do that. And I think that's why it's important to have managers who can do that for their smaller teams. I think that's why it's important to have a work spouse, right? That person who may not look like you. I made this joke that we don't get to call in black, or we don't get to call in a woman, or we don't get to call in and say, yo, I was at a gay club last night and that could have been me, and like, I'm destroyed, right? But do we have folks in our office who we know will just say like, hey, how are you doing? You don't have to go in and be like, you're gay, right? How did you feel about that nightclub? But are you establishing a culture where you don't have to be all up in folks' business, but it's okay to just ask if someone's okay? And I think that's particularly true for women, folks of color, and particularly for women of color, because we're so often taught that we can't bring our full emotions to the workplace. And if we do, we're too emotional, right? And so I think it really takes strong leadership. And if you unfortunately don't have that strong leadership, that's where I really think, how do you as a colleague let someone know that you're there for them? And I make the jokes about the safety pins, but what is your safety pin? What is your signal that it's okay? And often it's about connecting with people and actually talking to them and building that rapport before there's ever the nightclub incident, so that when it does happen, you're already there.
Hi, loved your talk. It was great. I guess my question is kind of twofold. One, do you think that you have reached a point where you where you feel like you can be your authentic self in white spaces? If so, how did you get to that point? If not, how do you continue to traverse white spaces now, as opposed to before and everything?
Yeah. One of my favorite Kanye West lyrics, and this is Kanye West pre-Kim, so Kanye when he was still like dope, is it's, broken down. It's basically like, even if you're in a fancy car, you're still a nigger, right? And so I think for me, yes and no. I think I have been successful enough. I think I've done enough cool things. I think I'm articulate enough. I think I also have a style that's not aggressive. And I always tell people, if you touch my sister's hair, she'll cuss you out. If you touch my hair, I'll make a joke and make it a little uncomfortable, but like make a joke, right? And I think that makes me someone that is a little less threatening. I have the pedigree that you'll still invite me to speak at least once, because I might know how to act, right? And I think that in that way, I am authentically myself. I show up, I am who I am, but I still have these moments in life where it's very clear to me that to a lot of folks, I'm still a nigger. Now, my last name is Butler, because when we were slaves, we were house Negroes, right? So I'm a good one, but I'm still there. And I think that that's the part that's tricky. I guarantee every person of color, every woman, every queer person that's like, I've made it, I can really be myself. They have those moments where you just fall apart. Because just when you think you're the shit, there's someone who will remind you, you ain't the shit. There's someone who will send an email about Michelle Obama being a monkey. And Michelle Obama is the shit. Like, how do you send that email? And so I think it's one of those things where I've gotten more comfortable with who I am. I have become more confident that I am my own person and I need to feel okay taking up this space, that I don't need to shrink myself for anyone. But there are still those days where I go home and I lay in my wife's arms and I cry. And I'm the executive director of the Bike Coalition in LA, and the bike world is a white world. And I get a lot of online comments that are racist, that are sexist, and those are hard days. And so I think the answer is yes on most days, but every so often there's a day that ends in Y where I'm completely reminded.
Thank you, Tamika. Thank you, everybody, for joining.